A seasoned player used to tough headwinds, Sunny Verghese is battling the worst crisis in his lifetime. The astute Group CEO of Olam International dissects for me the multiple shocks from the pandemic that are rippling through the global food chain. From the health crisis.
We have 89,000 people in 67 countries, so the first focus and priority is to keep them safe.
To demand disruptions.
The second big shock that we see is demand shock. Fortunately, 85% of our portfolio is in food and feed ingredients, and that is very recession-proof.
To obstacles along the supply chain.
In our industry, that is a bigger shock than the demand shock. And that is because of the forced lockdowns and the regulatory restrictions. We have many supply chain disruption impacts. So we find it difficult to get labor for our farming and upstream operations. We find it difficult to get labor for our logistics operations, for our manufacturing and factory operations, and therefore our production is not at full capacity in many of these countries. Although we have been saved from some of the worst aspects of supply chain disruption because our industry and our operations in many of these countries are deemed to be essential, and therefore we were given the permission to operate through the crisis, but we had logistics issues, labor-related issues, and other things that disrupted our supply chain.
Since co-founding Olam over 30 years ago, the group CEO has grown it into an agri-food giant with 89,000 employees in more than 60 countries, supplying commodities like edible nuts, coffee, cotton, cocoa, and grains to more than 20,000 customers. With a pulse on what's happening on the ground, Verghese is concerned about another emergency that's threatening the lives of millions around the world. Food insecurity worsened by COVID-19.
The final shock is really the financial market shock with credit to smallholder farmers, provision of inputs to smallholder farmers, and this is the Northern Hemisphere's main planting season, and those were substantially dislocated as well. So cost of credit for smallholder farmers has gone up significantly, the availability of the credit has come down, and all of these financial market accelerants, including currency devaluations. Many of these countries have suffered significant currency devaluations, whether it's in Brazil, whether it is in Nigeria, whether it's in Ghana, and many parts of Asia as well. And that has meant imported food price inflation has occurred, and therefore consumers are finding it difficult to afford food. Just to give you an example, Africa alone, 150 million people have lost jobs during this crisis. Each of them support a household size of 4 to 5 dependents, which means we have about 600 to 750 million people who have completely lost their jobs or significantly reduced the amount of time that they can really work. And 60 to 80% of the consumption expenditure of these folks are in food consumption, are allocated to food consumption. And therefore, increase in food prices as a result of currency devaluation and the supply chain disruptions has resulted in many of them having to eat less calories than they are used to, or eat less nutritious foods. And also you see in some parts of these, in many parts of emerging Asia and Africa, etc., the schools have been completely closed and locked down. In many parts of Africa, children get their only meal as a noonday school meal program, and that has also got discontinued. And many of the children are now under the threat of having to go back and work on farms. So child labor issues are going to increase.
The chief of the UN World Food Programme says the world is on the brink of a hunger pandemic.
The world is well supplied in terms of food, but the accessibility of that food, the affordability of that food being wasted are the bigger issues. And that is why we are worried that in developing economies and in emerging economies where people are losing their jobs and there isn't a job support program like in the developed world to protect their incomes, and in many of these countries, if they don't earn their daily wages, they have no way of eating on that particular day. They're daily wage earners, they're in the front line. If they don't get paid and they don't have work on that day, they can hardly feed. So the health pandemic is now become a hunger pandemic because people are not able to access or afford the food which is in plentiful supply, but not able to reach them, or they can't afford it.